Ladies and gentlemen, help me appreciate Haider Pasha as he comes to guide us through the next discussion. Thank you so much, Haider, and welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction. And hi, everyone. My name is Haider Pasha. As you just heard, I am the Chief Security Officer for Palo Alto Networks, looking after emerging markets, which is primarily Middle East, Africa, as well as parts of Eastern Europe as well. So I've been asked to talk a little bit around securing the hybrid cloud journey. And what I thought I'd do is I'd share a few best practices around the patterns of excellence. Now, I've presented at CIO Africa plenty of times. It's always a pleasure to come back and present. My point of view is really around how not just the CIO community, but also CISOs and the general IT teams should focus when they start building out whatever strategies they're doing. So today we'll talk about the hybrid cloud, and hopefully you'll take a lot of value out of the next roughly 20 minutes or so. So if we take a step back and think about where we're coming from in this cloud journey. When we initially began this journey many years ago, and I understand in Africa, there are different use cases and different organizations that are still beginning or are in the early stages of this journey. But that journey typically begins with a lift and shift approach. That's generally when you take your applications that you traditionally have on premise or on your data center, and then you start moving them to some form of a public cloud type of an environment. And again, the primary use cases here are really around using virtual machines and data stores and whatnot. But what we're finding now is many organizations have implemented what they refer to as the cloud native applications themselves in the cloud itself. So what that means is for organizations in South Africa, as an example, that have AWS readily available for them, they've got the luxury of actually implementing in some of the cloud native solution suites that AWS might have for them in order to let their DevOps engineers build, deploy, and run applications within the cloud base itself. But where we're moving to, and I see this as a future essentially everywhere, and not just in Africa, is sort of this multi-cloud environment where the use cases of both on-prem or data center, as well as the multi-cloud that they're going to be using, not just tied to one public cloud provider, are all going to be strong use cases to have. So you're kind of marrying what you're doing on premise and taking those tools and those services into the public cloud environment, and then actually taking that public cloud environment across multi-clouds in itself as well. And that's generally been the trend for, in the West, primarily in Europe as well, some parts of Asia Pac also. But what we're seeing is there is no one specific preference when it comes to the use cases for cloud computing. So there are organizations that prefer virtual machines, some that prefer containers, serverless architectures, platform as a service. So what we've been finding in the research that we've been doing with thousands of customers around the world is that generally it's a fairly even split when we look at the types of computational space. But what that does from a threat vulnerability perspective is that it gives us a few important use cases. The first is one of the reports we ran as part of our Unit 42 threat research team is we immediately found more than roughly 66% of organizations are actually using access keys that are older than 90 days. Now, there are certain ways and certain beliefs that I have in terms of keeping your access keys versus obviously, posting them. But I think that there's, from a credential perspective, this is a fairly major challenge. The other major challenge is that when we ran scans of the majority of containers that were out in the public environment, more than 90% came back with at least one critical or high severity vulnerability. And that's, of course, a key challenge as well. And then other challenges around compliance, obviously, the fact that some cloud databases were not encrypted, that was actually storing customer data is a key area. And so all of these are kind of top of mind when we start thinking about cybersecurity as we move to the cloud. But what's also interesting is that attackers are taking advantage of these risks as well. They understand that organizations need to move to the cloud. And so when you go back, 1 to 3 years in itself, you start to see a pattern. You see a pattern of ransomware being used on cloud services. You start to see a pattern of denial of service attacks, against cloud service providers, as an example. And you see, of course, a pattern of vulnerabilities that are now existing more and more on the cloud than they are on-prem, and obviously organizations having to take action. Yes, in the last couple of months or last couple of weeks, even more specifically, we're seeing an overflow of cyber activity due to the Ukraine situation. But even before then, when we look at Log4j or any of the other key challenges that we've seen, the majority of the organizations that are actually on the cloud traditionally have a lot of cybersecurity challenges that they have to deal with. And of course, without a clear cybersecurity strategy, they generally tend to struggle during those environments. So using McKinsey, we ran a cloud native security report about a year or two ago, and we asked some of the key CIOs and CISOs that we interviewed what they felt were some of the biggest barriers to cloud adoption. Now, for you and me, within the Africa region, we understand that cloud is generally sort of in the early stages. We also understand that there are regulations in certain places and compliance requirements from certain parts, of the government regulations themselves. However, when you look overall, and when you think about cybersecurity in general, the biggest problem or the biggest barrier to entry really is the security element of moving to the cloud. It's losing that control, losing that visibility, losing that compliance, if you will, of how that data is going to be moving to the cloud. And outside of that, what a lot of the CIOs specifically called out was the fact that what they're really looking for is identity security. So they want to have the same level of identity security for people that are on-prem as they move to the cloud. And they want to be able to understand the shifts that are happening as a result of COVID, that organizations are going to require more and more cloud usage in the future because of the operational efficiencies and everything else that provides. But this, of course, is a key top of mind for them. And understanding how to secure that environment is going to be critical. So I thought what I'd do is I'd walk you through sort of what we refer to as 5 patterns of excellence, right? So this isn't really a technical kind of drill down of an architecture or solution or anything else. These are kind of the patterns that I think as anyone moving towards a cloud-based environment, whether you are multi-cloud, a hybrid cloud, cloud first, or even the early stages of your cloud journey. These are sort of the 5 key elements of what I believe every organization should focus on. The first, of course, is visibility. And you build your strategy based on the visibility you have within your current environment, and of course, what the environment may look like in the cloud itself. And what we did at Palo Alto is, when we began our cloud journey many years ago, we actually used shadow IT to influence our cloud strategy. So what that means is we actually, when we ran our scans and we used the tools to identify where the cloud patterns are and what types of cloud storage exists, perhaps that is unsanctioned by the company, and we found some shadow IT in our environment as well. We took a step back and asked ourselves a question of not just, let's stop this from happening. It was, let's understand why this is happening. Why would a DevOps engineer go out and use his or her credit card to build a cloud workload, for their work purposes, and not come back and seek approval? So we sat down with the DevOps engineers, we sat down with those types of instances, and we actually learned about what was so critical for us to then build out our cloud security strategy as well. And then the other thing we did is we worked very closely with the cloud providers. We're big users, of course, of the Google Cloud Platform. We obviously have some instances of Azure as well as AWS as well. But what we really do is we sit to identify and utilize the APIs from the CSPs in order to track workload changes, for example, that take place as our engineers are doing the work itself. And of course, it's not a one-time event, as it says. This is something we do on a regular basis, and we do it in some cases almost in real time, which is really critical. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. The second key area is, of course, setting those right guardrails, right? So identify, in my view, sort of that dirty dozen, right? What are those anti-patterns that should not exist in your environment? Those really critical things that that should not happen in the environment, and identify them and make sure that doesn't happen. Those are the guardrails you start with. Obviously, you don't want to do everything from scratch, so you start from something that's that it pre-exists in terms of certain concepts or standards. But really, I think building upon that is going to be really critical as well. And again, you've got to think partnership and not autocracy, which again is where the DevOps or where your IT engineers and your security engineers all need to partner together to identify what those guardrails should be for the rest of the business as well. And this is an interesting one. So, there is no ISO standard for DevOps. There is no, a best practice, if you will, or a general standard when you look at many of the cloud-based functionality that organizations are using right now. What I like personally, and I think what we've done at Palo Alto as well, is we like the CIS benchmarks. So what we did was we decided to use CIS as one of the key benchmarks that we, of course, would then customize and perhaps change slightly. But for the most part, it's a benchmark that worked really well for us as we started moving on our cloud journey, and even today as we start looking at deployment within the cloud itself. But the main goal wasn't so much in picking that benchmark, so we don't have to do something from scratch. The main goal was to try and automate as much of the controls as possible. So it's I think almost unfair to have a human being interact every single time there's an incident that happens that is perhaps non-critical. It's unfair to have a SOC analyst, as an example, identify an incident, investigate the incident, and then go about doing the job that they do and take so much man hours in order to do that, where in fact all they need to do is essentially either allow or either block. What you should have is the automation built into the system, where if you've created that guideline to say, look, if it's 90% positive that something bad is happening, block it. You don't need to have a human being to take that interaction. I think those are the types of things that we really focused on as well. Some of it comes obviously from a mindset shift and an approval process that you need from the business. Some of it comes from partnering with the DevOps and other functions in the business. But it is possible where you can automate the majority of the prevention capabilities you want to put in for the cloud instances as well. And then the fourth area was really training the people. The majority of the time, what ends up happening is the DevOps team thinks that they don't that the security team doesn't understand what they do, and of course vice versa as well. So what we did at Palo Alto is we actually sat and trained some of our DevOps engineers towards the cybersecurity knowledge space, and we similarly took some of our cybersecurity leaders and trained them on the DevOps space as well. So you almost have these deputies on both ends of the spectrum, so that when the teams meet and when they start having commonality in terms of challenges or what they want to do, obviously you can speak almost the same language and get to a point where you're actually partners and you're not dictating in certain cases against what you want to do. And then the other thing we did for the general hybrid cloud environment is for those places where we felt we may not have the expertise or the right expertise, we actually hired consultants who then eventually will do knowledge transfers back to our teams in order to prepare them for the cybersecurity environment itself. And again, the main focus here is really to embed as much of the technology within the CI/CD pipeline, as well as the general IT environment that you have as you move to a hybrid cloud environment. This whole concept of shift left is really going to be critical for you as you start to build out whatever your cloud security strategy is. There are tools, of course, and that's what I'm going to talk about next, that I think can really help you, as you build out your strategy. One such tool, of course, is an organization we acquired about a year ago called Bridgecrew. This is a tool that helps you with infrastructure as code scanning. And the main focus here is, if you think about the problem of how the DevOps engineers work today, the reason why a DevOps engineer really does not like cybersecurity is they believe that it's a blocker for them in some certain cases. But what Bridgecrew does is actually scans the code as it's being created. And as it's being created, it scans for any vulnerabilities or any gaps in the code itself. So whatever code the DevOps engineer builds the first time, it's secure. versus having to build an insecure piece of code that gets replicated hundreds of times. And eventually, when a cybersecurity incident happens, you're backtracking from hundreds, possibly thousands of different evolutions of that code with the inherent vulnerability built in from day one. So it's removing that inherent vulnerability right from the actual inception of the code. And that's generally where tools like Bridgecrew have really become very helpful as well. So that's generally the 5 patterns of excellence. I think what's really important to understand for any organization is, you have to understand where you are on this journey. When you look at this hybrid cloud environment that we're building, we understand the need to build and work with a public cloud provider, but we want to use some of the data center functionality that we have as well. But it all boils down to the usual things, right? It's visibility. Have you defined your guardrails? Are you tracking how the data is moving? Are you tracking how the code for your DevOps engineers, as an example, is being created? And where are you on this scale? Really, I think depends on more of a gut check, frankly, that you have to do with your teams in order to identify those gaps and really fill those gaps in the future. But the one key area that I would also like to touch on here is that this is a journey that's not focused just on what's happening in the cloud. You need to think about your network security element. You've got to think about vulnerability management. You've got to think about many different aspects of the cloud security spectrum in order for you to build a hybrid cloud environment. I think these are the key kind of capabilities that I think are really critical, which again is a key area where Palo Alto Networks can help as well. And so the common question I typically get asked here is, okay, I understand the challenges, I understand the sort of the best practices that Palo Alto has deployed. What are the key things that you're doing and kind of the key capabilities that you provide? So we introduced the Prisma Cloud platform about 3 years ago, and this was really focused on one primary element. It was, let's give the users a single cloud security stack that allows them to essentially have their infrastructure, their applications, their identities, their networks, and their data all combined under one security element. So it gives you that single pane of glass, but it also does it in a way where it could be agentless or it could be agent-based depending on the use cases. It could expand to different types of functionalities such as containers, VM services, serverless architectures, and so on. And it integrates back to the security operations team so that they're a lot more educated in terms of what's happening, and they don't have to go to 4, 5, 10 different tools in order to gain that level of visibility. They go to one cloud security stack in order to do that. Because that's generally the trouble that we're facing today. As an organization, you're going to want to do all of these different functionalities, regardless of if you're in that lift and shift approach, whether you're in that cloud native approach, or whether you're in your hybrid cloud approach with multi-cloud. Visibility is important, workload is important, securing the network, the identity, the whole CI/CD pipeline piece that we talked about are all important areas. But what we're doing at Palo Alto is, so that you don't have to go to 10 different vendors, we've now deployed this Prisma Cloud platform suite that allows you to do each one of those functionalities under one umbrella. And do it in a way where, whether you are going back to those 5 steps that I just talked about, patterns of excellence, whether you're worried about cloud security, you have cloud security posture management. Whether you're thinking about integrating the security across the cloud stack, these are all the various tools that you would do, whether it's in CI/CD pipeline, using the cloud code as an example. All of these are important aspects that I think are really going to be critical, moving forward. And I think, again, when you look at the Prisma platform, the reason why it works so well and why many customers have deployed it now is we're having the ability of now learning from not just our best practices at Palo Alto, but also learning from various verticals and various types of customers and major customers around the world that have gone out and actually built this platform as a basis of their cloud security strategy. It is today, very easily one of the largest cloud security solutions in the industry. We are protecting more than 4 billion assets, on the cloud, 2 million workloads that are being protected. And to give you an example, this is a solution that we, or a platform that we started building about 3 years ago. So it's still fairly new in terms of the capabilities, and there's a lot more that we're planning on building in the future. But 2 million workloads is still a fairly large amount of workloads to be protecting in a very short amount of time span. We're protecting, as it says, more than 1,800 customers worldwide. For any of you that are interested in to learn about how we not just protect, but actually show a return on investment around the Prisma Cloud, we've done lots of ROI studies and operational efficiency studies, with many of the customers that have already been through that journey with us. We'd be happy to share that with you moving forward as well. So, again, the whole purpose of this was really just to kind of share with you what we do as an organization and some of the best practices that we deal with. I think what's really critical now, and as you go through the rest of the day, and as you have in the last couple of days as well, really think about the cloud security journey as more of a holistic approach, and not have to think about doing this in a single or a best of breed type of an environment. Think about it as a platform-based approach for the future, and Palo Alto will be more than happy to help you on that journey. Thank you very much.
We are the next.
The next generation of visionaries.
Rule breakers, game changers,
and world beaters.
We were built to perform on the biggest stages.
But we certainly aren't here to do what's been done before.
And neither are we. At Palo Alto Networks, we are ready to secure our digital future. As companies innovate to transform, we innovate to outpace cyber threats. So you can embrace technology with confidence and make the next day safer than the one before.
We've got next.